that takes a lot of effort to be something you're not.
Method acting is really when you find yourself just in this perpetual performance.
Daniel Day-Lewis knows he's in character. For us, the danger is we don't even know that we're in character.
If I stop being this person, am I going to lose everything? Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy. And I'm here with Mr. Adrian Crawford. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. What's something that you've been thinking about lately?
Oh, man. I have been thinking about the next 100 years.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the next 100 years. What does the next 100 years actually look like? You know, when
Do you know? Can you tell us?
Not yet, because I'm still really thinking about that. But I do think that, like I've said before, I do think we're living in a very pivotal time in history, and I think it is I think it's up there with those times of the 4th and 5th century to the time, and even beyond that, the time of Martin Luther, right after that, the Jesuits. I think it's just a real big shift in human history, and I think what we do and how we think about the next 100 years will shape, a long time after we're actually here. So I've just been thinking about that.
That's incredible.
Just something light to do.
Yeah, well, make sure you circle back. Let us know where you land so that way we can all be prepared for the next 100 years.
I definitely will do it.
Cool. Speaking of the next 100 years, we're going to continue the New Rules Podcast with our collaboration with Magnum Opus, The Art of Becoming One of One, which is authored by yourself, designed by our team here at New Rules Collective. And I'm going to unapologetically say every time, guys, go pre-order the book. The book is out for pre-order right now, and genuinely and honestly, you talking about the next 100 years, the world is going to continue to change at an incredibly rapid pace, and we have to have a really strong internal world, a very solid foundation inside, in order to be people that can really approach what's coming. And I know all of you listening to the New Rules Podcast right now, you're out here talking about, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to focus on, everything is noisy. This book, Magnum Opus, The Art of Becoming One of One, it genuinely has so many different principles within it that are going to be able to help you prepare yourself and develop the character and the skill and the talent that you need in order to be the person that you were designed to be within the world that is coming. Yeah,
it is. And it's something that I wrote and was hoping, and I think it is, that it's actually timeless, right? That 100 years from now, someone can actually pick it up and be able to read through it. Just as if recently I've been reading works of from St. Augustine, right? And so, that's written in the 4th century, and some of the stuff is just so relevant for today. So I hope that whatever I was able to write, that it can be timeless and that people can actually go back to it, and their great grandkids and they can read it and pick it up, and it actually can be something that'll be of value for them during that time.
Yeah. So I have the book right here, and of course we'll always have a little picture of it pop up whenever we reference it. And we're going to make sure that we have a pre-order link in the show notes as well. Nice. I grabbed the book again because last time we were joking about the cover and how it kind of looks very Illuminati.
Right,
And this was designed on purpose. So this was actually designed to be inspired by Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. And the reason why we did that is because many people, when they're looking at the Vitruvian Man, they talk about how it weaves together humanity and the divine. There's really no way to talk about the art of becoming one of one without acknowledging God's presence. And I think you do a really wonderful job of making this book accessible to anybody wherever they find themselves in their faith, whether they have it, whether they don't, whether they're trying to figure it out, while also acknowledging that the art of becoming one of one, it's a spiritual journey. So whatever you believe in, wherever you find yourself, you have to access a completely different level of your humanity to really even be able to begin the work.
Yeah, because I think that what we have to get to is that I think in order to really help people, we have to have baselines. We can't have things that are just where we've lived in this kind of this postmodern world where all truth is relative, and it's well, no, not really, right? Gravity is not relative. It's the idea that if you walk off a building, you're gonna fall. And I think that you have to have some baselines. And I think a baseline for me is that now again, I have a very clear. My view is there is a God. I'm a Christian, and it's the idea I believe in Jesus, all that. But the idea that there's something far greater You know what I mean? Like it's something far greater, and that there's something that you were just not made up out of random chaos, but actually there's been a very clear divine, like there's a divine, like the design for who you are. Because if that's not the case, then nothing that we write can ever really be helpful, because there's no baseline truth that's there. There's no foundation. And so I feel like that's why, you know, throughout the book I mix it in, but I also wanted to do it this way because it's just my life. I'm talking about writing a book about being authentic. My life is not where I sit here and I talk in Christian platitudes all the time, or you know, I'm saying praise God all the time, or like, you know, thus saith the Lord. Like, no, I just talk like a human. And when I see truth, I talk like I can just talk in any realm, in any world, because truth is really truth. And so I wanted to be able to mix it in there, because that's how my life is. So I can be sitting in a room with athletes, I can be sitting in I can be in the barbershop with all different types of people, and I can just talk like I can just talk, and I don't lose who I am, because the truth of those things guide me. And so that's kind of what this book's about. It really is hopefully an authentic reflection of actually like who I am.
Yeah. So last week we talked about frozen water. We talked about the iconic quote within the history of New Rules is that human beings are like snowflakes. Every single human being is unique. Every single human being is irregular and not able to be replicated. And at the same time, we're all just frozen water. There's so much about us that is the same, and that we are regular. And in order to become irregular, you have to embrace all the things that make you common.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to stay in the echo, which is really just about excavating. It's about self-awareness. It's about discovering more of what is your life speaking to you that maybe you haven't been able to hear, or that you haven't, that you've ignored, that you haven't been listening to. So we're going to continue on journey through the echo, and today is going to be the Unbecoming, which is another iconic story. Do you remember whenever you came up with the Unbecoming?
Yeah. It was this idea of I was just thinking about like acting, and I started thinking about like, man, who's like my favorite actor, who's some of my favorite actors. And so I started like looking into like favorite actors, and my favorite actor is like Daniel Day-Lewis, right? I think he is just a phenomenal actor. And so I went and started looking up some of his stuff, and then I started learning. For whatever reason, I went and I started, he does this technique called method acting. I'd heard of method acting, but I didn't know like what all it came from, or the roots of it. But it's like this 15th century, if I'm not mistaken, 15th century, like kind of like art form, to where people would just actually go into character. So if you're playing, you know, like Daniel Day-Lewis plays, he plays Billy the Butcher in the Gangs of New York. And so it's like in the like late 1800s, early 1900s. So he goes fully into character, and you stay in character. You talk like that person. You eat what that person eats. I mean, you think like that person. When you're offset, you're still being that same person. And so you get fully enveloped. And so I started realizing as I was studying that and looking at that, how that has kind of been a little bit of our world and people. That people honestly, they method act. They put on a role that they think is what's going to win them an award or whatever they're asked to do, but they stay in that character. But the difference is that Daniel Day-Lewis knows he's in character. But a lot of times for us, the dangerous, we don't even know that we're in character. We actually think it's really us, and that is where it becomes incredibly dangerous.
So I think most people, maybe they hear you talk about the idea of method acting, and they don't really go about their daily lives asking themselves, am I being a method actor right now? Again, like I said in the beginning, I'm saying it over and over again because I think it is reality of where people find themselves right now. Most people are really anxious and overwhelmed and fearful and not sure what to prioritize and what matters. And so before we even get into method acting, to our listeners, what would you say, what would you like to give them permission to just focus on as they're listening to this episode? Yeah,
I think what I want you to have permission is just to be very curious, not to like, you know, when I talk about this, I talk very direct, and I talk about the dangers and the impact of stuff like this, so it can feel really aggressive when I'm communicating this, right? And so, but what I don't want this to be is somebody feel like, okay, I'm actually like out here like judging them, or I'm out here just saying, I can't believe you're an idiot and you've been method acting. No, but I do want to say it with intensity, because I do realize that what you said earlier, I think it's one of the main reasons why people are exhausted. I think it's one of the main reasons why people are, I think they're struggling in life, because they have like, there's things that they can't even speak to it because they don't think about it enough, or something's not lining up. It doesn't feel like something just is like integrated well within their lives. And so with this, I just want to give you permission just to be like, to be curious, and just to ask yourself as we go through this, just to think about like your everyday life. They just have some curiosity, and not to judge yourself about it, but it starts with curiosity, because if you can have curiosity, that can actually help you begin to realize if that's something going on or not.
Yeah, method method acting is really when you find yourself just in this perpetual performance. What do you think is the cost of that?
I think the cost of it, but it really does think it impacts, like, I think it has an effect on the impact that you make. And I think in a world to where, and I'm more thinking about the future. I think that what we're coming out of is that we have like this more, like I said, this platform type of deal. So you could go online, create whatever persona you wanted to, and people would have this persona, right? And you could go there, do all that. I think that is becoming more and more a thing to where it's becoming a little bit more exhausting. Even I was listening to something the other day to where it's talking about like how people believe social media will start to like, social media will be around, but like it's starting to lose like, like the buzz that it once had, because it's like everybody's just on it. It's also, and it's just, it's
everyone's an Instagram hater right now.
Yeah. And it's just performative. You know what I mean? Everything is just, it becomes so performative. And so I think that that's what it's lost. It's lost because I believe actually when you wear that mask, especially in the world that we're entering into, I don't think you're going to be able to produce the fruit, make the impact, in your life and the lives of others around you when you're actually playing a role, because that's not who you were designed to do. And I also think what it'll continue to lead to greater mental health issues. I think it'll lead to greater fragmentation in relationships. I think it'll lead to people who actually are just like they're constantly in a place of exhaustion because they're being someone that you're not. That takes a lot of effort to be something you're not. You know what I mean? Like, because you have to, like, even though you're not consciously thinking about it, there's an effort you put into like showing up and have to like be on, and you've trained yourself now to like, I have to go in here and say you're a female and you're going to a male dominated environment. So you have to go in and you got to put this whole, like, you're naturally like, you're not like a super like, like outside like this hardcore person, but you have to do that because you may be the only female in this all male dominant environment. So you have to act a certain way, and this becomes second nature. But that's a lot of effort that actually ends up happening. So I think people just get exhausted. I think those are some of the things that are going to come along with it.
Okay, so how do you differentiate between talent and skill in performance?
It's good. Talent, skill, and performance. Yeah. I think that it's all, and again, I'm always going to come back to this. I think it's about intentionality. I think that sometimes when you are performing, it's I'm trying to gain something, versus I think talent, skill. Now, let me go back. I think you can use your talent, your skill, and you be performing. I believe that when it's really done well is when you're using your talent and your skill to actually add value, and to add value wherever you're at. And now that looks as a performer, because you're going to be doing your job. Hopefully, I think you'll be doing it well. So there is a level of performance that people see, but I think it's done in a completely different way, versus it being like, I'm leading to get approval, or I'm leading to get this job, or I'm leading to show, to this outside stuff, versus like, no, this is just who I am. And I just want to be able to add value. So if I'm on a team, man, this is what I do. And this helps my team be successful in the boardroom or on a court or wherever it is. Same way when it comes into your home, like, man, when you're adding value because, man, this is who I am, it helps my family, versus like, man, if I do this, it grants me favor from my wife or my husband or, my kids, whatever it may be. And so I think that's the difference. I think it's the intent.
So how would you describe the difference between, I guess, practicing to hone a skill? I'm thinking about something like athletics, for example, when you're in hours and hours and hours of preparation. And when you're doing that, like, you're playing a part. Like when you're on the basketball court, you were playing a part in a role, and you were playing that part in a role so frequently. So that way, by the time it got to game time, by the time it got to the true like performance with the audience, you were prepared to play that role at your fullest capacity. I guess, how would you differentiate between the value in being able to do that versus what you're calling method acting and what we're calling performance? Because I think we're calling performance not necessarily the expression of your skill sets, but we're talking about when you're living a life that is disintegrated and disconnected from who you're designed to be.
Yeah, I love how you use the idea of athletics. So I'll give it to you in that context, because of working a lot in athletics, and specifically, say, in basketball. One of the things I always tell players is this. I was like, do never turn a game into like your personal workout. And what I mean by that, your personal workout, you're working on stuff. Like, you're trying to develop, get better, or whatever. You get in a game, you do what you do really well. Not also I'm going to be trying to work on stuff in a game. And a lot of times, here's what happens. When I see in athletics, a lot of guys who have opportunities to, say, play in the NBA, and they've got another year left in college. And what they'll do is while they're sitting in college, they may hear an NBA scout say, hey, you got to be, they need to see you, or an agent or somebody say, they need to see you shoot more 3-point shots, right? Whatever. Shoot more threes. Well, what's made them their money and what's got them on draft boards is the fact that, let's say they drive, they can get, we like to say, they put 2 feet in the paint, they can drive the basketball, they can score around the rim, they do that. That's their bread and butter. And what you'll start watching guys try to prove to NBA guys they can shoot the ball now. And so now they become less effective. And I've seen it so many times, their draft stock drops because who they actually are, they stop doing that. Instead of adding that skill and saying, hey, this is a skill they need to see, but this is what I do. This is what's got me to the dance floor. And so that's performance. Performance is like, now I'm doing this because if I do this, I'm going to get something from somebody else, versus when they were doing it, this is just what I do. And it is like natural for them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that people, it's nothing that you don't work on your skill, but I think there's natural things that you do, and you have to really lean into those things. And I think there's certain seasons where new skills come out or whatever, but it's always, again, I'm going to keep saying this, it's always the intent. What is the intent of why you're doing it? Is the intent to, in an athletic event, to help my team win? Is the intent in work and business, is it to help my team win, help my company move forward? In my friendships, what is it? If your intent is that, I think that's when the real authentic stuff comes out. But if it is for other stuff, for approval, if it's to get to this level, it's not about what's the betterment. I keep saying about humanity. I think you're going to easily confine yourself into that idea of acting.
Something we talk about a lot is the on-stage performance versus your backstage reality. And I think this is completely relevant to method acting. I guess sometimes it seems like your backstage reality is really where you're preparing. It's where you are like consciously and very diligently living an integrated life. Like you are doing the work that you need to do to hone your skills, hone your craft, discover who you are. And like life does, like there are moments in your life where you will be on stage, you will be visible, you will have maybe from a small or a very large impact on people. And there's like these mountaintop moments in life that are very much so the on-stage performance. And it seems like when you're backstage, practice so diligently the work of having an integrated life, a strong character, honing your skills, so that way when those moments come, you don't feel as much of the pull to be a performer, to be a fraud. Yeah,
no, absolutely. As we were talking earlier, and even as before we were actually sitting there having this conversation in the car, a lot of my life is really shaped, and like I said, it's really around the center of this idea of the Bible. So I see my world, like my worldview is through that. And actually, I'm preaching right now through Joseph. And if you look at the story of Joseph's story is a lot like that, where Joseph was this rich, spoiled, arrogant, rich kid, right? He's a trust fund kid. And all of a sudden, Joseph goes and, there's these series of events, real like traumatic things happen. Joseph sold into slavery, all this stuff. But what you see with him that's really powerful is the fact that when he finally gets, he had these dreams, he had these ideas, he had a dream that, I was going to be this, he's going to be able to rule and do all this stuff. And he goes this 13-year period of obscurity. Finally, when he stands in front of the most powerful person at that time in the world, he literally is okay with not taking credit. He was just good with who he was, because literally he knew that God had given him the ability to do that. So when he stands in front of the person, that would be the moment you read out your resume. Hey, I did this. Here's my LinkedIn, my LinkedIn bio, man. Here are all my clips.
And all the people he told, hey, when you see the king,
when you see the
tell
king,
him about me.
Tell him about your boy. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could have, there's a whole thing, but when you get there, he's like, no, I can't, but God can. Yeah. And so he took everything off of himself and he pushed it there. So what's the point? What you see is that you see someone who is totally okay with where he's at, because when you look at his life, he was, wherever he was still doing what ultimately he ended up doing in that top seat. In that top seat, become the second most powerful person in the world. He still did the same thing he did when he was at Potiphar's house, who was this temple guard who ran the military type deal. And then when he was actually, in a prison, he still did the same thing. And so that's why I tell people is that your backstage reality will just play out when you get on, like when you get to the moments, it just plays out. We get to see that. You just don't get to turn that on. You get to see that. And what I tell people, the more pressure hits, the more you actually get exposed in that process. And so that's why when we say backstage and on stage, man, that backstage is really who you are. Mm-hmm. No one's around, this is who you really are. But then going to that on stage is what we want to see.
Yeah. The reason why we call this chapter The Unbecoming is it really comes from this quote from Lady Gaga, which is, I remember when you were first forming method acting, coming across this quote, you know, when you're kind of crafting a talk and you're looking for that one last piece of the puzzle that's going to thread everything together. I feel like you finding this Lady Gaga quote was like the moment in crafting everything on method acting that you have. But she was acting in House of Gucci, and she was talking about how she was practicing method acting, and she was just so diligently working to really become the character that she was playing. And at the end of filming, she says this quote. She says, "It wasn't the becoming the character that was hard. It was the unbecoming." So then she goes on to describe how challenging it was to come back to being Lady Gaga as she adopted all of these mannerisms of somebody else in order to play this part. And I think that captures what we mean by method acting so well. Like there are areas within your life where you're seeking for approval, maybe a greater measure of freedom, maybe you're looking for a level of wholeness, and through that you start to become somebody else in the way that you talk, the words that you use, the things that you think about, how you spend your money. And it happens so slowly over time and becomes like subtly like very corrupting. How have you seen that happen in your own life?
Oh man, it was a lot I'll start with growing up. Because I moved a lot of places, right? And when I moved, I just didn't move like to, they were like drastic, right? I went from the South to like the Midwest / Northern Ohio, right? From Tennessee to there. Then I was, back to Tennessee, then went back up there. And so it was like, it was different worlds. So I would find myself, whatever I had to do to like fit in, I kind of like did, right? So here's a funny story, because like living in the South, during some of my formative years, right, you just end up having like this, like you get around people who are in the South, so there's like a twang to how people talk. So it was funny because I didn't even realize I had one until I went back to Ohio, and my friends saw me and they were like, "What is wrong with you?" Like, my friends who I had left in Akron before, they're like, "What's wrong?" Because I had this Southern twang, like to how I was talking. And it was like, and I had no idea. I was like, "What do you mean? I'm just, I'm just talking normal." And they're like, "Man, have you ever heard yourself talk?" And one day I'll never forget, I was back in this was really dating myself, where you had the tape recorder, and they literally just like recorded me talking. And I was like, who is that talking? I'm like, that can't be me. And so what happened, I had no idea I was being formed, just even something that simple, right? But going to something even more like, is more kind of, I think, diligent is like, even as I've moved forward early on in business, or early on when I started in ministry, to where I started method acting, right? I didn't grow up in church, but I come from a line of what they call people who are preachers, right? They're going to like, there's the energy, there's the challenge, there's all that. Like, I'm not like a teacher, but I'm really like a preacher. It's just to inspire you, to pull you up, to do that. I literally said it's like in my DNA. It's my grandfather, my great grandfather, the whole deal. Well, early on, I was method acting because I thought, in that world, what was really big was like, man, people were, especially at the time we started, there were like these guys, these reform writers and reform preachers, and from the late, from the I think 18th, 19th century or something like that. And all these guys were like, Martin Luther and John Calvin. So everybody would quote these dead white guys. So I'm like, I feel like I had to quote dead white guys to have legitimacy instead of being just a preacher. I didn't want to be just a black guy who was entertaining people. I wanted to be, but what I was doing, I wasn't being myself. I wasn't being actually who I was hardwired to be. Now, in that, I think there was room, because I tell people, you're accountable once you become aware. It wasn't in my consciousness that I was doing this, it was my subconscious. But once I started realizing that, I realized, I've got to start doing this, because here's where it got dangerous. It got really dangerous because without me even thinking about it, whenever I would hear like a black pastor or read something from a black theologian, I would always cross-check it with somebody white. And it was like, and I wasn't even thinking about it. I was like, okay, whatever. And then one day I'm like, why do I do that? And it was because I had allowed overall popular culture to make me think that like black theologians, black preachers, that they can inspire you, but they're not deep. And for me, that was a lie that I just bought into and didn't even realize I bought into it. And so it was allowing me not to be who I was. So those are very practical ways of where most of the times when we're becoming something, we have no idea that we're doing that. And here's the truth about it too, you're going to that's going to happen in life. You're going to have society, culture, things that you don't even know, your own insecurities. They're going to morph you into something that you're not. The key is once you become aware, and that's why we always talk so much about the evaluation. Once you become aware, you're accountable. It becomes very dangerous when you know that, but you're like, man, I get too much applause like this, so I ain't going to change. That's when it gets really dangerous.
I guess kind of going into the danger of it all. We've talked about before how something that can be a life vest to you in one season can end up being like a weight.
Yep.
So if you're sitting in the middle of the ocean, something that's helping you float over time can eventually come something that's pulling you underneath the water. And I feel like that's oftentimes like what these little survival instincts do to us. Like at first, you were probably thinking like, oh, I'm in my bag. I'm like diving into theology, and then over time it really did start to exhaust you. I think I've got to experience you in different seasons like that too. How would you describe more about how practicing method acting over time can become imprisoning?
Yeah, it becomes imprisoning because most of the time you become honestly, and I'm going to say this is going to sound kind of drastic, but honestly, you become a clown. You just become an entertainer. You will do whatever to just keep getting the approval or the money or the the hand claps, whatever, with applause, whatever you want, you just keep doing it. So I see it so many times today, where people, they will it's authentically who they are, right? I unfortunately I see this a lot in a church space where pastors and preachers, they start off and then they have something they do and they do it really well and it's actually genuine, but it's what got them popularity. And what they begin to think is that thing is now who they are versus that was just a container of who they were, right? They could use analogies, you know what I'm saying? Also, they were great at teaching theology. I've seen in business, all of a sudden, man, people produce a product or they were just, they were passionate about sharing their product. And so now all of a sudden they got a little bit of a platform. And people like how energetic they were, but it was just, they were doing to sell a product. Now all of a sudden they think, oh, I've got to be this energetic person. And now because they're like, I got to keep getting that, whatever that is, that approval, right? And I think that's when it becomes a prison because you never can change and evolve because you become slave to the people and what they want from you. So you just become a slave because you have to do whatever they're going to do in order to continue to feed the machine, which for you, that's your insecurity, that's your brokenness, and you'll just stay the same. And I watch people not evolve. And here's what happens. At some point in time, I've seen this too many times. People get to a place to where they're like, yeah, we're going to go to the next new hot thing. And so you're like, man, but I kept doing all this stuff for you and you never evolve and then you become irrelevant. And so I think that is why, because you become an absolute slave and a clown to just everybody else and you just end up entertaining people versus actually being someone that you actually are and evolving over time.
What role does shame play in all of this?
I think shame plays a lot because I think that many times we are trying to make up for things that have happened in our lives. And again, sometimes there are things that we didn't even do, or mistakes we've made. I've seen people do that where they've made mistakes in their life. And so now, a great example would be I've seen people who've maybe failed at their first business. And then what they'll do is they'll go out there and they are so against how they were before. And so they'll try to be whatever was a negative, they'll go to the complete opposite side and they'll start and they lose who they are. Maybe that part before got a little bit out of whack, but it wasn't that. It's just, man, you weren't great with finances, man. It was a bad, product market fit, whatever. But then they'll go a completely different direction, right? I see that a lot. So then people lose themselves in that direction. I see people who are working a job and all of a sudden they spoke up one time. right? And they spoke at one time and they worked for an insecure boss, and that boss is like, all of a sudden they put a mark on them. That was it, and they get fired. So what do they do now? I'm never speaking up. I'm never saying anything. And what they do is now they live in shame, which can then turn into anger, bitterness, whatever, And so I think that shame plays a huge part. I think many times in shaping people different ways.
Yeah, I feel like shame plays a big deal for me.
Okay.
I feel
in
like
what way?
The art of, and I almost said the art of unbecoming. I guess it is that too. I would say that the reason why I pretend to be somebody else is because I'm afraid of what will be perceived of what I actually am, which is shame. And I would also say, for me in the phase of life that I'm in now, I think I feel more avoidant of once you realize once you're aware you're accountable. So once you realize who you actually are, I recognize that then there comes this unique burden, this unique responsibility that is like, dang, once I know that, I'm going to actually be accountable. Like once I know what makes me one of one, I'm going to be required to live within the limitations and also the enhancements of what it means to be one of one. So I'm going to have to accept all the things that I am not. And I'm also going to have to accept the cost of all the things that I am. So
that's a great point. So when you talk about like the idea of, which I love how you said that, the idea of the limits you're going to have now, why does that, which I understand, but I want to hear from you, why does that bring shame?
I think that, do I feel shame about the limits? This is a real time trigger feeling meaning. This are the actual practices of how you unbecome. I don't know if I feel shame about embracing limits. I think that I feel more ashamed of, maybe it's not the act of embracing limits. Maybe it's people have judgments about what you believe matters. So I think the more I become one of one and the more I embrace limitations, the more people have opinions about the things that I am and am not willing to do. Okay. Because the same things don't matter to me. You know what I mean? I can give an example, like very practically. I feel like the more that I realize who I've been created to be, so there's like levels of wisdom. I would point out specifically wisdom in leadership. Like I think those things are very prevalent and they come with a massive weight. Like I think wisdom and leadership are two things that I recognize the responsibility of how to like stored power. And also, I think the responsibility of how to stored power, and because of my faith, like the judgments that come from not storing power well. That being said, that means that how I stored my time, what I do with my mind, what I do with my body, like all of those things I hold to like a very high regard. So I'll specifically focus on time. So when we're building what we're building right now, when we're building Authentica, my time with my friends, my personal time, those things are completely shifted in the way that I navigate them. And I would say that's a really strong application of how does mission and call play out with my one of one? How does that impact my day-to-day life? And what does that mean, like my energy is or isn't going towards, and how is that going to bring judgment? Because the truth is I don't think that I'm ever going to have a life where I live a 9 to 5. I will never have a life where that's my life. I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's just from a call perspective and what I'm supposed to do as a person. That is a container for me that I'll probably always be in, is not being in a 9 to 5. And there are judgments that come with not having the accessibility, both physically and also emotionally, like that people would expect me to have, especially at 26.
And does that make you, so how does the judgment, because now it goes to that point. So why does the judgment or the fear of the judgment or whatever it is, why does that hit you? Well,
guilt means I did something bad, and shame is I am bad. And so maybe at first I'll feel guilty, or I'm like, I'm not meeting this person's expectations, so I'm not able to be present with them or engage with them in the way that they would expect. And I can see how like me meeting their expectations might even add a lot of value to them, but I don't feel like I can. So I feel guilty for not being able to do it. But for me, because of shame, like I take it much further than I'm doing something bad. I take it in towards like I'm a bad person. There is something wrong with me for not being able to meet all of these expectations.
Yeah. And it is. And I think that I've started to realize this. It is really hard work and it is exhausting, like to become like, to actually to live an integrated life. It's like literally exhausting because you're thinking about that stuff and it's so much easier. I get it, because what you just said, you're like, man, you go to like, man, okay, I'm a bad person, whatever. And then the other side of that is this full swing of like, they're dumb. Nope. That's whatever. And you start blaming them.
Yeah.
And what that does is create this, like, it can create some arrogance, distance. Both extremes are bad. Living in the in-between and balancing that is freaking very difficult. It's so much easier to be like, yep, it's all good. I'm just going to sit on this side, right? Versus like, have you ever had to like stand on one thing and it's just flat? It's great. You're standing normal. When you have to balance on something, it's just like you're engaging every part of your body, right? I think that's what happens a lot of times. And I think that's why a lot of people, even as I've seen as they get older, they stop doing that because they're exhausted of trying. So they go to one side or they go to the other. That's why it doesn't shock me that like you have all these older people like on these extremes now because they're like, yeah, I'm just tired and I want to do it. And so I think that's where this tension. So I always tell people, when you're going into this journey, be prepared for it being incredibly painful and incredible, like, hard work to do that.
Yeah. Do you think that the work of Unbecoming could ever destroy your life?
Yeah, it can. I think it can. Now, here's what I mean by it can destroy your life. If you've built a life based off of a character, and like as this act or whatever.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, if I stop being this person, am I going to lose everything?
Yeah, no, and that's the cost. And most people aren't going to do that. So they'll spend the rest of their lives. But it's really interesting when you talk to people like that behind closed doors. I have people who I work with, and I'll talk to them behind closed doors, and they'll say that to me all the time. They're like, dude, I wish I had like your ability to just be free. But I'm like, you do. But they're like, I can't. Because here's what they are is they're way more committed to the money, the access, the power, than they actually are to being genuinely who they've been designed to be. So they rather just play the role. Yeah. And so they make a trade-off, which is fine if they decide to do that. But I just think that so many times people go through that in life, and that's why I'm so passionate about helping those who are younger, because I just see it is so difficult. I mean, it's darn near impossible when you get older. I mean, I'm not, and especially depending on the type of resources you have, the type of influence you have, it becomes, if you have a lot of influence, a lot of money, it is a miracle for you to actually unravel that, unless something drastic happened in your life, because it's just like, you're not willing to give that stuff up. You're comfortable, you have access. You're not going to give that up to something you don't know that maybe, but you're willing to make that trade-off. And so I think that,
Yeah. And I think the hard part doesn't even seem like it's the unbecoming. It doesn't seem like it's, choosing to not play that role anymore or choosing to give up those things like you just mentioned. It seems like it's believing that you have the ability to rebuild, like believing you have the ability to become again.
Yep. And also what you have to realize is that when you start to rebuild, what will probably change is your scoreboard.
Yeah.
Before, I mean, because when you're acting and you're playing these roles, whatever, your scoreboard is just, man, it is like approval, money, or power, or something like that, right? What if your scoreboard is like, man, now all of a sudden you start, you're used to having that, but now your scoreboard becomes, man, it's actually now about how many actual people am I actually helping? And I'm empowering. So it's not about what I'm accumulating, it's more about what are they accumulating in their life now. What if that's the thing now? Now all of a sudden that's a completely different scoreboard. Now that's like going from playing basketball. Now you're like, your basketball, that's how you score a basketball game, to playing soccer. It would feel so different because you're like, man, I'm used to scoring 60, 70, 80 points. And I'm like, I scored 2 goals, right? I just think that's what it is. So I think that is where it becomes very unnerving. It becomes very disorienting for people when they actually start doing that, because it is just a real difficult shift.
Yeah. It's interesting that when people acknowledge your authenticity, one of the things they say is that they wish that they had your freedom. I think that's so powerful because it's so true. Like one of the things that you feel in like the wake of an authentic person is usually freedom. Like things just feel more free, more whole, more true, and more real. And as exhausting as the work of Unbecoming and having to rebuild and become seems, there's this relief that comes with getting to that place when you realize all the things that had leverage over you before that didn't really matter, they don't anymore.
Yeah. Again, it's in, my album of the year is Let God Sort Him Out, by the Clips. And there's a line on that song with Kendrick Lamar where he talks about this. And again, he's using therapy, where he says, therapy showed me how to open up. It also showed me I don't give a. And that is one of the realest lines and so just think about that from an unbecoming standpoint. Like when you become free is when you're like, oh man, it shows you, like you start opening up. And then the most freest place is when you're like, yeah, I don't care. And not, I don't care because I'm like, yo, F the world, I don't care. It's like, no, I don't care if you like me or you don't like me. But if this is what I feel is right, it's because no one has leverage now. They have zero leverage on you. She's like, I'll walk away. And when you can get to that place, that is when you become you become the most dangerous, is when you get to that place. When you can walk away. That was the first bit of business advice I got from somebody who's worth he's worth $500 million. And I asked him that one question, like, what's the one bit of advice you can give me in business? He's like, the most powerful person in the room is the one who can always walk away. And so he says, you always have to have outs to be able to get out there. And I think so many times people, they want to do that, but they are over leveraged. They're over leveraged financially. They're over leveraged with their relationships. They're over leveraged with their need for approval and acceptance or comfort. And it's hard for them to kind of like to let that go. So they can't do that at all.
Freedom seems to usually come with a cost. What do you think is the cost that you've the cost that you bore?
No, I think the cost that I bear for freedom has been like this. It can be lonely. It can be, I think at times, slower.
Why?
Because I think when you're building something that is like, usually think about a masterpiece, right? It doesn't happen fast for the most part. Every now and then somebody lucks up and they do something, but like for the most part, it's like, it's just, you have to hone it. It takes time. And I think that's where, so like, even if you're going about it a certain way, you could like skip steps. But you decide to go this way, it just takes a little bit more time. I think the other thing that it can do outside of loneliness and taking time, I think it can really begin to shift. Like what's really painful about it, I think is, man, your thought of what your future would look like. I think so many times we all have these like, dreams or expectations or whatever. And some of those things are real. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're like this whole expectation, our desires are strictly out of a shame, desire of just the desires of our flesh or whatever. And it's not really who you really are. I think that becomes disorienting too, because your whole life was just like, man, I'm just trying to do this. And then all of a sudden you're like, that's not even really what I want. That's pretty disorienting because you've been thinking about all that. So I just think it's a completely different like world. And I think in those times, that's why I tell people that when you're going through this work, it is so important that, man, like you have room to go through it, that you're willing to take your time and go through it, because it just becomes a lot in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we live in a world where method acting also receives so much benefit.
Yep.
Like usually method actors, honestly,
win the awards,
produce the best movies.
They do. Yep.
I think that's true. Like we give a lot of opportunity for people who play parts and play parts really well.
Yep.
A lot of access and a lot of power. How have you created environments, whether that be a culture within your family, a culture within business, that values authenticity over method acting?
At first it was very difficult, especially it's becoming easier. And here's why, is because you can perform in like a market that's up and to the right. You get exposed when things are unpredictable like they are now. And, like I kind of see it this way. Just imagine like, someone's method acting. So they're playing this role and they're acting a certain way, whatever. Now I want you to imagine somebody walks in with a gun and like, what I'm saying? Like I want you to imagine somebody walks in with a gun and like starts to like you're gonna see how committed
scares you into normalcy.
You're scared.
How committed are you to the
how
part?
committed to the role? You're not.
Yeah.
You're gonna be like,
Under
oh,
pressure.
you're gonna go right back to who you are, right? That's what happens in this moment. I think that people start method acting, and that method acting doesn't work. You know, let's say you're playing a character in a role of someone who can convince somebody of stuff. All right, well, then somebody's really got a gun to your face. Now, can you convince them of that role you play? No, because that's not who you are. You're playing a character. And so I think that's what's really important, is that in this unstable market, it's become like easier. I think before it was very difficult because people thought I was crazy. I mean, like, you have to understand, like, what I thought I was supposed to do, like, I'm like, man, be this forward-thinking person, and it's like people were like, man, you're in Tallahassee, Florida. You know, you're a former athlete. Like, what gives you the right to think you can do this? And like, and I used to feel like, and you know, and then when you're insecure, like, well, man, maybe I can do that. And so, like, I don't know, it was just hard. I mean, and again, I'll be honest with you, the city I live in, like, I love the city I live in. It's a capital city, but people in the city try to dumb you down. There's like a cap, there's a limit. People try to dumb you down. And what I've had to learn to do is, like, there's certain people I don't talk to about what I want to do. Why? Because they're not going to understand. They're not supposed to understand it. Because if they were supposed to understand it, they would do it. So it's not for them. But I think I have enough of a track record. That's the other thing too. The more you do it and the more you have a track record, the more respect you get. Because people are like, I don't know what you do, but it seems to work.
So how have you actually created that, like, even within your family?
How I've done it in my family now, and even though I have 2 adult children, is I'm constantly talking to them and asking them that question: what's happening? What's going on underneath? Why do you want to go there? What about this thing? What does that do, you know, for you? And I also have to have room too. They're young, you know what I mean? Like, you know, my kids are young, so they're gonna have those things. I can't have an expectation that, like, oh man, they're not gonna have like desires like everyone else has, or desires to want to be accepted by people. Like, who, you know, wouldn't do that? And I get to see, like, there's very difficult parts of that for them too, because like one of the things is that I see with my daughter at times where, like, you know, sometimes like with relationships and friendships and things like that, because for her, there's some things, you know, again, like anybody, she continues to get better at, but there's also parts of her too where she's just like, there's just a certain standard and there's certain things that she wants, and it's what it is. And I think that's authentically who she is. And some people like it, some people don't. I think there's a leadership, you know, like literally her name means to break out and defend. Mm-hmm. She has a leadership quality on her life. So you know what you're trying to do when you're trying to develop that, you're just going to come off, I mean, like an a-hole. And you know what, sometimes you are one, but that's just part of it. And what you don't want to do, and what we tend to do in our site, try to kill that. Don't act like that. Don't do that. No, you got to try to help. No, you can't do that. But how do you hone that? How do you make that better? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's kind of been some of the process. And all your kids are different. And the same thing happens with Wendy. Like, you know, for her, it was like, man, being who she was, because like there's these certain dynamics and things that people thought that she should be, being a wife and doing whatever. But like, it's just different. So what I've had to do is create an atmosphere where she can be who she is and go operate the way that she needs to operate into the world.
Yeah. Authenticity is hard because it's not as predictable.
No.
And so
that's a great point.
It would be so much easier for you to like really control and domesticate your kids and your family.
Yes.
And you would, in some ways, in the short term, benefit from that predictability.
Yes, absolutely. No, it is. I get it. Like when doing it this way, it absolutely, you don't have control. Because like you can just, I mean, by force of like just your ability to communicate, you know, I mean, again, my actual stature, you can control things. But like that does not lead to like long-term relationship, long-term freedom, long-term impact for them. What that leads to is it kills it makes my anxiety go down. But for the most part, it doesn't. It makes my life easier. But I just realized that if it's just about ease, then there's usually if your life is always just about ease, then you are on a one-way road down to something really bad. You're on a road to nothing that's going to be good. If like your whole life is, you're just always trying to find comfort and ease. The road is difficult. The road of life it's uphill. There's battles. There's all that stuff. And so you have to be willing to do that. And I think that the more you can lean on life of not being predictable, I think the better, because that's what life is.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think someone begins if they find themselves just not really sure how to differentiate between their original design and their current performance?
Yeah. I would ask the question, like, to just start asking yourself, I mean, seriously, just start asking yourself why. You know, like, and I'm talking about small things. Like when, let's say, you have that moment when someone calls you and you really don't want to go out with them. Like, you don't want to go, like, hey, we're going to go to this, whatever. We're going out to eat. We're going to a cigar spot. We're going to do brunch, whatever. And you really don't want to go, but you say yes. Ask yourself why. And see, even though that sounds simple, like, but why did you say that? Even though deep inside that moment, I really don't want to go. But why? Because what that can do starts making you curious about, man, that right there is a moment of acting, right? Because you don't want to go. Now, sometimes it could be because, man, my friend really needs me to hang out with him or her. So, you know what? I'm going to go because that's a good thing. But, like, I'm talking about things like that. Or when, like, your boss, your boss asks for something. And then it's like, man, do you do it? Do you not? If you do it, why do you do it? Is it because of, oh man, like, you're trying to, or like when like those moments you're in there with your boss and they tell a joke or something like that, and the joke is dumb, but you like give the most craziest laugh ever. Ask yourself, why are you doing that, right?
Like, push them on the shoulder.
Yeah, you're like, that's a great one. That's like, or you go in there and you start talking about like stuff you have no interest in, right? Like, ask yourself, why do you? Those are just moments, and what that does, those are moments of you just acting. That doesn't mean you're not respectful or whatever, but it's starting to even just think about it. I think that's the number one thing. Just start thinking about, why do you do what you do? Mm-hmm. Why do you post that picture? Why do you want to be in certain environments? Why do you, whatever it is, because those are just small moments. Method acting is just built just every little micro decision. Every micro decision, you're doing something for approval. That's how you just form the mask. Mm-hmm. And so I think you got to start becoming aware of that.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Because I think it dives into the extremes. Like, I've been on some, because we do a lot of stuff in corporate and did for a while. I've been on some calls where, like, the call will start off with, let's say, like 10 or so people on the call, and maybe like there is majority of like the room is guys, and they're talking about sports, and you kind of have that moment where it's like, either I'm going to like just like smile and nod, mm-hmm. or I can really go the other extreme and just straight. Yeah. And there's people, maybe there's like one other girl on the call or something that like you can kind of tell the vibes based off of like, maybe like I'm looking at her and she's like, oh no.
Yeah, I'm not doing this.
And it's like, I think that those are two. There's one where you like completely play into it. And then there's also times where it's kind of like, do we need to go the other direction either?
I think it's a moment. Yeah, I think because what that leads to, that then will lead to another type of character, which you'll be like, you know what, I've seen this before, where you will see people who may be a minority, and that could be, and that's just not like, it's not even just race, it could be gender, it could be whatever, and they're like, they take on they're actually a super friendly, kind, collaborative person, but because they're the one person that's the minority, and they're like, nah, I'm not gonna sell. In their mind, they go the other way. I'm not gonna sell out. So they're doing what you do. They sit there and what you just talked about. Quiet, don't say anything.
Like either full on performance or complete disengagement.
And what you're doing when you're full on disengagement, if that's not your natural disposition, you know what you're doing? You just put on another mask. You're just doing it a different way. And so I think that's why, again, it's such hard work, because like you have to emotionally have to be like, because it's like sometimes it's difficult.
Well, because we're talking about this stuff. This is like, I say this because it's the reality of the situation. Then I'm thinking about everything you're saying when we're sitting in the call.
Yes.
So before I'm not even doing anything. So I'm sitting there like, oh, am I going to be a performer? Am I going to disengage? Like, what would it authentically look like for me to engage in this conversation? Yep. By the time I'm thinking about that, we're already moving on.
Yeah, we're already gone and you're moving on. And that's why the more you can practice this and all those little things, then when you show up in those type of moments.
Yeah, now that I've thought about it.
Yeah, now you're just going to be, because I'm naturally going to be myself. And there's nothing wrong, because maybe, again, for example, you grew up with a bunch of guys around, you know what I'm saying, your family.
Yeah, I'm not really offended by
by sports. And there's sometimes like certain sports things you do know about or whatever. So all of a sudden, it's like if somebody's talking about like, if somebody's talking about like Miami football because of like your brother and your dad liking Miami football, you could easily chime in on just like, oh yeah, and just be, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're like, oh, I can find common ground, whatever, cool. And so I think it's one of those deals to where it allows you to engage, and sometimes it's like, oh, if they come to you, oh, well, you don't like sports, like, and what if you don't? You're like, no, I'm not a big sports person, like, blah 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 blah. Okay.
Sometimes if someone's like, hey guys, like I'm not super into sports, but did you guys see? And then you just completely say, I don't know, something completely different.
You say something.
You see the Grammys the other night?
You say something completely different, or it's just like, or like we've been on there before. There's sometimes where we have to do another time where we've been on calls where it's like, and you connect with it, but there's times where it's like majority, like it's all black people and maybe like you and one other white person, and we talking about black Twitter, and like you understand black Twitter well, and so but like Bree's like, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, it's not even an act. It's like, oh, I know black Twitter, blah blah blah, but somebody else is looking on there. So like, what does that do for me? Sometimes I have to be like, oh, hold on, I need to be mindful of that person who. Because I know what that's like to be on the other side of that. You know what I'm saying? Where I'm the only black dude on the call, and they're talking about freaking going hunting. I'm like, all right, this is cool. You know what I'm saying? So.
I had another question I was going to ask after that, and now we got down this rabbit trail, so now I need
All right, what question is this?
Okay. What I was going to say is, because we started off by asking, like, what do you do if you don't know the difference between your performance and your backstage reality? Yep. And you said talk about why. Another thing we talk about a ton is the Genesis 3 story. The first question that's asked in the Bible is from God to Adam and Eve, and he asks the question, where are you? This is after they're in a place of hiding, and I think we've established that method acting really is that place where you've begun to hide who you truly are from the world, and to the point where now it's hard for you to even know who you are to yourself. So let's do like a brief practice, and then we need to wrap up. But if you were to answer the question, where are you right now, how would you say it?
Yeah, great question. I think right now, where am I? I am very much so entering into another phase. So just imagine like I've been used to a certain amount of like territory and land. Now I'm going into a new phase with way more land, way more territory, with all different types of characters, with people who've had way bigger territory, way bigger land. And so right now, there really is a deep dive into making sure when I'm in that world, because there is a growth that has to happen. So I have to really be now. I'm on this phase of like really being aware. Am I method acting? Am I not? Because in this place and land, you could actually act like you're more than what you are, or you can go back and diminish who you are. And so I think that's where, for me, it's this constant tension right now. So I have to be in a constant place of reminding myself, no, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is the season that I'm in, and do that. Because if not, I can go to either side. So I'm actually in that place of wanting to, like, in times, just like put on the mask or just go cover and hide, because I don't think I'm good enough. And so I'm just kind of in that tension right now because of the season that I'm in.
Where do you feel like God is?
I think God is right where I'm at, and I think he's okay with where I'm at, and I think he is moving me into this because here's why I know I think God's moving me into this, because left to myself, I was pretty comfortable in the world I was in. I understand small business really well. I'm able to start them really fast. I'm able to get them pretty profitable really quick. And I probably could start a bunch of them, scale them super fast. But the next phase for me is not that. It's actually larger. It's more, it is something that is more, and not in the, in the 9-figure, start 7-figure range or 6-figure range, but now it's the 9-figure type range. And so that's the thing. Or when you start thinking about, like, even in a church setting, I know how to do, like, we've built a really successful local church, but it's like, all right, well, what does that look like now to grow that beyond capacity to then impact even more people in other places? So I think the capacity, I think God's just there, and I think he's the one calling me out because it's not comfortable. And at 47, sometimes you're like, yeah, dude, I'm good. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't, but I also think too, there's always in this desire for more. And I think he's put that there. So I think he's right there.
Yeah. So I think for everybody listening, I think, of course, Adrian's been doing this for a really long time, but it's a good example because you talked about the pressures you were experiencing. You're talking about, there's a reason why you chose those specific pressures. What I might choose might be different if I was in that same situation. And so then you talked about why did those pressures, why are those something that really push you into a level of conformity or push you to change? You talked about what you're afraid of, where your fears are. And then another thing why I asked that question is because we often always, a good place to land if you're someone who's in a position of faith, is to then ask yourself, like, where is God actually? Like, what is he speaking over my life? So you can remind yourself also of what is true, because we believe that there is a truth. And then that act in itself of just being able to verbalize that to another person, when you do it, like, you can feel the freedom and like the relief of being able to vocally say it, and the connection that happens in your mind when you realize the things that you're up against and how they're pressing you to change. And so I wanted to do that just because I know it gives an example to listeners to really practice the, like, okay, well, like, how do I'm saying why, but like nothing's coming. Think about the pressure you're facing, thinking about what you're thinking about, how you're feeling about what you're thinking about, and share that with somebody else, because this really is a communal work. Let
me tell you this. The best thing you can do as we close this, if you can consistently learn how to just learn where you're at, just learn where are you at. And then if you're a person of faith, like you said, where's God? If you're not, and you're saying, man, but where's truth at then? Like, where is, are you, and what I mean by, like, I mean, I'm here, you may be sad, depressed, or you may be, here's the other one, let's go more positive. Man, I just feel really good. Then why do you feel really good? Like, why was that? Meaning, like, even today, as I was like, before this, I was doing some work today, and it was like, man, I was so, speaking 3 times, on a Sunday, it can be very exhausting. And usually Monday mornings, I'm like more fatigued, whatever. Today, I was in such a good place because I was actually working on something that I know I was supposed to. And so that's what I know, man. Because when my body feels like in a certain way, I know that's what I'm supposed to be doing at that time. So just find those things. Ask yourself, where's truth? Where's God at in that? And I think you're going to have make it a lifestyle. And I think you'll really begin to unpack that and start unbecoming.
Yeah. What you find might be scary, but we're going to teach you how to rebuild too.
Absolutely.
And we're going to get there soon. But for now, we're going to stay in the echo. Pre-order the book.
Please do.
Link is in the show notes. If you listen to this far, we hope that this episode added some value to you, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime,
keep writing new rules.